As a high-stakes divorce lawyer, I would introduce this as a case where the husband thought he was managing a quiet betrayal, never realizing his wife held the stronger hand all along. He planned the venue, the guest list, the launch, and the lies. What he failed to understand was the legal architecture behind his marriage, the trust he never fully read, and the fact that the woman he underestimated was already 3 moves ahead before he even noticed the game had changed.
It was a careless mistake, an open invoice on her husband's laptop. The subject line read, Isabel's debut. It listed champagnes and cured meats he knew she couldn't touch. At 8 months pregnant, standing in their Chicago penthouse office, Eleanor was supposed to be booking their baby moon. This was not that. In moments, she uncovered a year of private reservations and inside jokes. Then, the event planner's note. A chef's first restaurant launch is everything. She deserves it all. He had agreed, for another woman, while his wife was in the next room. Then she saw the detail that changed everything. Something Marcus, her real estate developer husband, did not know. The venue, a restored warehouse in Fulton Market with its 100 guests and $50,000 budget, was owned by her family's private foundation. She didn't call the caterer. She picked a dress and decided to make an appearance. This is a story about a wife who played a supporting character for a decade. And the one night she became the lead. The person you overlook is the one holding all the power. This is about quiet resolve and a woman reclaiming her story. Whatever you are facing, let this be a reminder of your own hidden strength. If this story moves you, share it with someone who needs it. Leave a comment and tell us, when did a person who was supposed to cherish you fail to see you entirely? We read them all, and if you are new, subscribe. We have a new story every week, and you will want to see how this one ends. It began with an invoice. Not a fight, not a suspicious call, not the scent of a different woman, or a strange charge on a credit card. It was a simple document left open on a laptop in their home office. The event was titled Isabel's Debut. The attached proposal had 52 items. Eleanor recognized 6 of them. They were all foods Marcus knew were forbidden during her pregnancy. It was a Thursday morning in early November. Eleanor was in her 3rd trimester. She stood at the desk, barefoot, a hand on her aching back. The morning light over Lake Michigan, which once felt like a promise, now felt like an accusation, revealing all the secrets. She had only meant to check their flight details. She was wrong. The laptop was already on. Marcus never logged out of the home laptop. She used to see it as a sign of complete trust. Now she understood it was pure arrogance, the confidence of a man who never thought his wife would have a reason to check. The first thing she saw wasn't the full proposal. It was a message in the thread. Can't wait for Saturday. Eleanor minimized the file. She picked up her tea. She drank the whole thing. Then she maximized the file again. 3 times. Down, up, up. One more time. Eleanor, just look. She opened the detailed plan. The email was to Chicago's top event coordinator. The chain of messages documented months of planning. She knew because she scrolled and kept scrolling. She stood there for 10 minutes and took in the entire architecture of his other life. A life her husband was building while she built their nursery. The notes were efficient. That was somehow worse. Methodical. They included pet names, pictures from his development trips, and plans for the party at a location Eleanor had once suggested he invest in. An idea Marcus had called a guaranteed loss. She'd had read without breathing. Then, the last exchange. Marcus, the Fulton Market space is confirmed. Private event. Saturday, 100 guests. They're handling the vintage champagne and the full 10-course tasting menu. Planner, this is spectacular. You really went all out. Marcus. A debut only happens once. Isabel deserves the world. Eleanor looked down at her own stomach. I am 8 months pregnant with our daughter, and you are financing another woman's entire future. The tears didn't come. They would show up later. Instead, her mind became, as she'd later explained to Maya, completely silent and dangerously sharp. Like a machine, executing a new cold program. She didn't take a single screenshot. She didn't read a single line twice. She put the laptop to sleep, leaving it exactly how she found it. Then she went to the kitchen for an apple. She opened a drawer for a paring knife. She ate the slices with her fingers standing right there. She looked out at the Chicago skyline, the city Marcus worshipped, from the home her inheritance had provided the down payment for. That thought felt sharp and new. She never allowed herself to think about her family's money. Her father, Thomas, had firm rules about wealth and humility. The only thing you truly own, he would say, is your integrity. Her integrity was currently barefoot and planning the systematic dismantlement of her marriage. She didn't send one text. She didn't make one call. She finished the apple, she rinsed the knife, and put it in the dishwasher. Because that is what you do when your life begins to fracture. You rinse the knife, you put it away, you breathe. When Marcus came home at 7, tie loosened, she had his favorite IPA waiting and was on the couch with her own tablet. She looked up. "Got you a beer?" she said. He took the bottle. He said nothing about his plans for Saturday. He kissed her forehead, the kind of kiss you give someone you no longer really see. It was both familiar and completely hollow. Then he was gone. Eleanor closed her tablet. She sat in the silence for a minute. The penthouse buzzed with the sounds of the city. She focused on the sounds. She let them be normal. Then she picked up her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. It rang twice. A familiar voice said, "Eleanor, you're calling after business hours." "Mr. Davies," she said, "I need you to send over our prenuptial agreement, and I also need the asset summary for the Vance Foundation's latest real estate acquisitions." There was a brief pause. "May I ask what this is concerning?" he asked. "Not yet," she replied, "but you'll know soon enough." She ended the call. She placed a hand on her belly. The baby was kicking, insistent little thumps that felt like hellos, as if her daughter already knew she had to make her presence known. "I hear you," Eleanor whispered, not out loud, but in her thoughts. "No matter what, I hear you." The city lights still shone in the window. They still looked too bright, but something inside the room had changed. It felt, strangely, like a starting line, not a finish line. She couldn't name the feeling. She could only experience it, the quiet calm of a woman who just found her footing and realized the ground had been hers all along. She hadn't been entirely truthful with Marcus when they got married. She had her reasons, she'd told herself, but in that living room, with a clean knife put away and a secret large enough to shift a fortune, she began to see, with perfect clarity, the truth she had hidden to guard her heart was now the very thing that would save it. Maya Desai had known Eleanor Vance since they were 19 at Northwestern. That was 11 years ago. In that time, Maya knew two things for sure about her best friend. One, Eleanor never cried where anyone could see. Two, when Eleanor called at 8 in the morning on a Friday and said, "Can I come by?" something was terribly wrong. Maya had the good coffee brewing when Eleanor's car pulled up. Not the instant stuff, but the single origin beans she saved for emergencies, the kind that required a long, serious talk. Eleanor came in through the side door. She was in last night's sweatpants. Her hair was in a sloppy bun. She was 8 months pregnant and walked with the deliberate pace of someone who had just made a difficult final decision. She sat down at Maya's kitchen counter. She explained the invoice, the misdirected plans, the restaurant debut, and the warehouse space. Maya listened with a focused stillness that showed she was stopping herself from shouting. Her knuckles were white on her coffee cup. She hadn't taken a sip. She was processing with the gravity a true disaster demanded. When Eleanor finished, Maya finally spoke. "Okay, wow. How are you doing?" "I'm fine," Eleanor said. You're not fine." "No," Eleanor admitted, "but I'm focused. That's what I need to be." She wanted to say, "I suspected something was wrong." Not this exactly, but she knew. She had blamed it on hormones, on the stress of the baby, on the fact that Marcus was always driven and distant, and she had married him anyway. "I knew. I just didn't want to be the kind of woman who said it out loud." What Maya knew of Eleanor's money was just enough to sense she came from a different world. There was a family foundation. Eleanor's father, Thomas Vance, was what Maya called a Chicago institution. Audrey drove a classic convertible. Her fashion was timeless, never trendy. She managed a small art conservation fund, driven by a love for history, not profit. It was an inherited, quiet affluence. What Liam failed to see was its true depth. Why the director of the Met always took her calls. Audrey never discussed that the Vanderbilt Trust was valued at over $6 billion, or that her personal stake was 38%. Liam had a junior associate at his startup review their prenup. He barely read it. She recalled her grandmother's advice on influence. You never reveal your strength until someone declares war. Liam had just made his first move. Audrey asked her lawyer how long. The affair was over a year old. A year ago, they were in the Hamptons for their anniversary. She recalled the ocean breeze and a rare art book he'd found for her. That book sat on her nightstand. She told Mr. Finch she had confirmed her pregnancy 10 months ago. So he was already with the other woman? Yes. When I told him we were having a baby, he was with her. He'd hugged me, Audrey remembered, said we were a team, that this was everything. It was all a lie. The silence in her apartment was heavy. The low hum of the city was the only sound in a world turned upside down. For years, she'd overlooked the signs, the patronizing tone, the small dismissals. She blamed it on Liam's ambition. She remembered him calling her fun her little hobby, how he'd over-explained tech news to her, the jokes about her being endearingly analog. His surprise when she understood a complex market trend. I thought he just saw me as modest, she told her lawyer. No, he just assumed you had nothing to be proud of. The words were a clean, sharp cut. He never suspected a secret, because he thought she was insignificant. After a moment, Mr. Finch asked the inevitable question. What's your play? Audrey looked out at the New York City rain. I'm going to his app launch party, she said finally. Mr. Finch looked intrigued. On Friday, she confirmed, at the main event, with his head of PR, Jenna. Liam is completely unaware that I know, she said. I will keep up this pretense for a few more days. Why? Audrey lifted her teacup. It was now cold. Because some revelations, she said, deserve an audience. She already knew what she would wear. The Vanderbilt emeralds, a set that cost more than Liam's entire seed round of funding. The drive back to her Tribeca loft took 20 minutes. On the way, she allowed herself to remember. She thought of bringing Liam to her family's Newport estate. The main house was larger than any building Liam had ever been in. Her grandfather had offered him a vintage port. He was polite, asking Liam about his startup's valuation. Later, her grandfather looked at Audrey and said, he sees the money, but not the heritage, does he? It was a statement. No, Audrey admitted. When are you going to tell him? When I am certain he loves me, not the name. Her grandfather's eyes were kind but piercing. That is not caution, my dear, he said. That is insecurity. You are better than that. Yes, Audrey had whispered. I know. She had planned to tell him after their first year. But 1 year became 2, and then a wedding. The prenup Mr. Finch drafted was so ironclad she never gave it a second thought. The omission had become her marriage's central pillar. It was a foundation she couldn't remove without collapsing the entire structure. She hadn't lied to Liam. She had merely presented an edited version of her life. For 3 years, she wondered if that was a mistake. The men who knew about the trust were always different. They saw her as an acquisition. Liam had seen her. She needed that, to be a person before a portfolio. But now she wondered if she had only enabled a man who needed to feel superior. She parked in the garage of their loft and paused for a few moments. The door was open, revealing Liam's top-of-the-line Peloton and custom shelving, a renovation she had paid for. He had managed the smart home installation. It had felt like a partnership. She went inside. Liam was out for the evening. She went to her library, the room he affectionately called her Antique Corner, a nickname that was a subtle jab. She sat, opened her tablet, and video called Mr. Finch. His face appeared, his office overlooking Central Park. The room was a mix of leather-bound books and glowing monitors. At 62, he looked sharp. He had been the Vanderbilt family counsel for 3 decades, and was her father's confidant. He always looked at her with a mix of warmth and worry. "Tell me what you found," he said. So she explained it all. He listened, his face a perfect mask of neutrality. When she was done, he asked, "How far along?" 31 weeks. "And the prenuptial agreement? What's his claim?" "I am well acquainted with it," Mr. Finch said, cutting her off. He pulled up a digital file. "The summary is, his claim is virtually non-existent. Your great-grandfather was a fortress builder. The family trust is untouchable. The shared assets, things acquired during the marriage, can be divided. But given the disparity in contributions..." "What counts as a shared asset?" Audrey asked. "The loft, mostly. A joint checking account. His Porsche. The loft is appraised at what? Roughly 10 million. You provided the entire down payment from a private account." "So," Audrey began. "So," Mr. Finch concluded, "if a judge were feeling particularly charitable, Liam might walk away with $200,000 in his car. And if he knew about the family trust?" she asked. "He does not," Mr. Finch stated. "But what if he..." "Audrey?" Mr. Finch's voice was calm. "He signed a document he failed to research. Liam has no claim on the Vanderbilt trust. The assets are walled off. He is entitled only to a fraction of what you chose to share," she nodded. "Now," Mr. Finch asked, "what is your intention?" "I am waiting for the launch party." "I will be there," she stated. "He is launching his new company with his mistress, while his pregnant wife is meant to be at home. I will not let that be the public story." A heavy silence filled the call as Mr. Finch considered her words. "Should I prepare for litigation?" he asked. "No," she replied. "Nothing so crude. I just want him to see me, to finally understand what he had and what he has forfeited." Mr. Finch nodded. "Do you require anything from me?" "Yes," she said. "Please compile a complete list of my family's venture capital investments in the tech sector. The press releases, the board seats, everything." "For what reason?" "He is going to search my name," Audrey said. "I want him to find something substantial." Then Mr. Finch added a final, critical piece of information. In his dry, quiet tone, he said, "Audrey, are you aware that the Vanderbilt Fund is the primary investor in the cloud hosting service his new app runs on?" She went completely still. "Essentially," he said, "Liam is launching his entire company on your family's digital infrastructure. You could, in theory, cause him significant operational difficulties." Audrey was silent for a moment. "I don't want to destroy his work," she said. "No," Mr. Finch said, with the barest hint of a smile. "I didn't imagine you did." "I just want to be there," she repeated. She used the rest of her day to plan, not to mourn. Her grandfather taught her to arrange the board before making a single move. On Wednesday and Thursday, Audrey performed the role of the proud, supportive wife with flawless precision. Liam came home around 10, ate the dinner she'd prepared, and asked about her day with a vacant look. She, in turn, asked detailed questions about user acquisition strategies, forcing him to engage. At her 32-week scan that Friday, Dr. Lin guided the transducer over Audrey's belly. "He looks magnificent," she said, her eyes on the monitor. The baby's growth was perfect. His heartbeat was a powerful, steady rhythm. His position was ideal. Audrey watched the pulse on the screen, a strange sense of resolve settling over her. She shared the good news with Liam later, telling him their son was strong and healthy. "That's great, hun," he said. His gaze fixed on his laptop, she noted that he never used the name they'd chosen, Theodore. He had agreed to it, and apparently archived it like a closed file. She suppressed the thought. There was too much to organize. On Thursday, Liam had a late strategy dinner and came home after 2 in the morning. He smelled of expensive gin and a trendy Soho bar. She was in bed and pretended to be asleep, a performance that was becoming disturbingly easy. When his breathing deepened, she lay awake, staring into the dark. The fury she knew would come later, a tidal wave after the quake. Right now, there was only the quiet devastation for the life she thought was hers, and the way she had curated herself to fit into a space that wasn't a marriage. It was an acquisition. Once Julian was asleep, Ellie had to move. The silent weight of her thoughts made the air feel heavy. She went to the home office and began to work, channeling her powerlessness into process. She started cataloging their entire art collection on a new spreadsheet. At 7 months pregnant, she found herself cross-referencing auction records until the early morning. It was a methodical, necessary madness. When the last file was saved, she started a shower, letting the steam fill the cavernous master suite, not for comfort, but to have something to breathe besides the silence. She sat on the floor of the walk-in closet, his suits hanging like ghosts, just listening to the water run. She'd found the file on their shared home server, tucked away in a mislabeled folder, a draft of a press release detailing a new corporate merger. Her eyes caught on a single sentence. This venture solidifies the personal and professional partnership between Julian Vance and Sasha Petrova. Sasha Petrova, the ruthless venture capitalist whose firm was funding Julian's new AI platform. A thought, sharp and cold, cut through her. He's liquidating our life. That was what finally broke her. Not his recent detachment, not the hushed phone calls. It was the clinical, corporate language used to erase her, to announce a future built with another woman. She wept without a sound, a skill learned from a childhood, where emotions were liabilities. Then she rinsed her face with cold water and climbed back into their bed. It was time to learn everything about Sasha Petrova. The connection was now brutally clear. Sasha's digital footprint was a monument to power, features in financial journals, a keynote at Davos, an engineering degree from Stanford, a narrative of a life forged in logic and ambition. In every photo, she radiated an unshakable confidence. That was what hurt Ellie the most. She had hoped for a foolish mistake, a momentary lapse. But Sasha seemed formidable, strategic, which made the betrayal feel like a calculated business decision. Was Sasha even aware of her? Or did she view Ellie as a line item, to be written off? The question brought no comfort. She didn't hate Sasha. She hated Julian for turning her life into a hostile takeover. This isn't just an affair, she thought. It's a merger. Julian approved this. He courted her investment. He brought her into their world. This wasn't a slip-up. It was a meticulously planned succession. On Thursday, Julian came home with a diamond bracelet she didn't want, his guilt worn like an expensive cologne. The pattern was now painfully obvious. He asked about the nursery. He mentioned a reservation at a restaurant they both loved. He set his phone screen down on the kitchen island. The tell. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice layered with false concern. She looked at him from across the marble. "Honestly," she said, "like I'm waiting for the market to crash." He just nodded, dismissing it as pregnancy nerves. "Completely normal," he said. She pushed a piece of chicken around her plate. "I guess." Later, he brought up a tech summit that Saturday. "It's a full-day thing. You'd be so bored. Just have your sister over and relax." He wouldn't meet her eyes. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. "Of course, have a good time," she said, her smile brittle. The relief on his face was instant. He had no idea she knew. On Friday, she called her brother. David listened to the entire story without saying a word. When Ellie finished, David said simply, "I see." "Is that all?" Ellie asked. "What else is there to say right now?" "I don't know. Advice." A pause. "Dad would be furious," David said. "But he'd tell you that anger is leverage. You have to use it." "Oh, I'm using it," Ellie replied. "I know you are." "Good. So, are you going to that summit on Saturday? Because I'm coming with you." Ellie told him absolutely not. "I just need you on call, a backup plan." The silence on the line was thick with protective, fraternal rage. "Just text me the address," David finally said, "and the schedule. Saturday, 8:17 a.m. Ellie chose a navy blue sheath dress. The empire waist draped perfectly over her belly. Her reflection was a stranger, calm and resolute. She sent a text to her best friend. "Game on." The reply was immediate. "He's been the CEO of their friend group since college. Your father would be so proud." She put down her phone. "Okay, little guy," she whispered. The downtown San Francisco Convention Center was exactly as sterile and imposing as she expected. Polished concrete floors and walls of glass. The city's skyline was a backdrop of ambition and steel, a perfect fusion of commerce and power. Low sofas were arranged near a large stage. Staff in black uniforms offered coffee from carafes at a long chrome bar. The room smelled of caffeine and opportunity. A massive interactive data sculpture pulsed near the entrance. Around 200 people were networking. Her name wasn't needed. The security guard remembered her from the last year's event and waved her through. Julian, whose company was a headline sponsor, had no idea. Just act like you belong. You own half of his name. Don't look for him. Or her. Get some water. Find a strategic position. Let them find you. She went to the bar. The server saw her stomach and offered a sympathetic smile. Sparkling water would be great, she said. He served it in a sleek glass with a slice of lime. She looked the part. She found a spot with a clear view of the main stage and the entrance. She waited for less than 5 minutes. And then she saw Julian. He was on stage, part of a panel, speaking with animated authority. He was wearing a new Tom Ford suit she had never seen, one that wasn't from their closet. He looked completely alive, more energized than he'd been in months. He looked free, like a man who had successfully divested a failing asset. And she knew with a crushing certainty that she was the failing asset. There it is, the truth I've been ignoring. He's not escaping work. He's escaping me. To him, I am the past. She is the future. I am his obligation, and she is his exit strategy. She watched him for another minute, invisible in the crowd. Then Sasha arrived. She walked in wearing a sharp, tailored blazer, and the room's atmosphere shifted. She gave a brief nod to an acquaintance. The entire room seemed to subtly adjust to her presence, the way markets react to a major player. Conversations quieted. All eyes followed her. Julian turned, and the look on his face, Ellie seared it into her memory. It wasn't just attraction, it was confirmation. The profound satisfaction of a CEO watching his stock price soar. He looked at Sasha Petrova the way a founder looks at a successful IPO. Sasha was formidable. Ellie registered it as a simple, undeniable fact. This powerful woman was now a material fact in her life. The moderator began the Q&A. He moved closer to the stage, his arm nearly brushing Sasha's as they stood side by side. Ellie's hand flew to her stomach. 7 months. The baby kicked a slow, insistent turn. A reminder. I am here. We are here. Do not forget. She would not. It was Ben, Julian's COO, who spotted her first. She saw the emotions flicker across his face. Confusion, then dawning recognition, then the sheer panic of a man watching a crisis unfold in real time. He excused himself from a conversation and rushed toward her. Ellie, he started. His voice was tight, the word catching in his throat. I had no idea you'd be here. Hello, Ben, she said, her voice even and calm. It's quite an impressive turnout. It is, he stammered. Ellie, maybe you should... Is there another room I should be in? She cut him off. His mouth hung open. I didn't think so, she said, taking a slow sip of water. Ben made a swift retreat. A moment later, he was speaking urgently to Julian. She watched Julian's shoulders tense as he absorbed the information. She could practically see the frantic calculations running behind his public facade. Julian turned. His eyes scanned the audience and then locked with hers. He froze. It was the distinct terror of a man whose firewalls have just been breached. His two realities were about to crash. Was this a mistake? A trap? How did she know? He started toward her, his walk a carefully controlled effort to appear casual. She saw him school his features into a mask of loving surprise. Sasha, he said, his voice a smooth lie. Darling, what are you doing down here? I thought you were resting at home. She didn't look up from her phone. Just doing some due diligence, Julian. This press release, it's a very bold move. Can you explain the $90,000 line item? A vein pulsed on his temple. That was his signal, the subtle tick before a grand deception. Seed funding, Julian said, for a founder's relocation package. We discussed her. You mentioned a new app developer, she replied, her tone even. Correct. So, what is this developer's name? The silence that followed felt heavy enough to suffocate them both. She had come to understand that his quiet was a confession. "Isabella," he said, his voice a strained whisper. "Tell me her name." In that moment, a cold, brittle clarity washed over her. There was no heartbreak, no rage. For the first time in a year, her mind was perfectly clear. He gripped her elbow, pulling her into the empty study. The mask of the devoted husband had vanished. This was the real man. Frightened, trapped, and underneath it all, a flicker of what looked like relief. The end had finally come. "Let me tell you what happened," he started. "Don't," she cut in. "I already know. Isabella, I saw the full business plan on your laptop, Julian," she said. "Last night, for the Lincoln Park penthouse." The study was dead quiet. The distant city traffic was a low hum. "I know about Simone," she went on. "I know it's been a year. I know you're leasing her a penthouse overlooking the lake." She let that hang in the air. "Our daughter is due in 7 weeks, Julian. You're setting her up in a home while I've been here, carrying our child." He recoiled, his face turning pale. "Bella, I am so sorry. It's not that simple." "I'm sure it isn't," she said. "Life is complicated. That is a fact, not a justification." "Please, Julian," she whispered, her voice soft but unyielding. "Just be quiet." He froze. "This is being handled," she continued. "My attorney will contact yours in the morning. You will need to find another place to stay tonight." He gaped at her, stunned. She saw a new watch she hadn't bought him, smelled the ghost of a perfume that wasn't hers, his face a canvas of disbelief. A man who never grasped what he was losing. "I am not the one who is leaving," she said, walking past him to the kitchen for a glass of water. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the lights twinkle across Chicago. She was 7 months pregnant, and, having just confirmed her husband's affair, she felt an unnerving calm. Like the stillness before a storm. The truth she never told was that the tears had come and gone. Alone in the study, after seeing the video of his protégé's award speech, she had wept. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, crying without a sound, a trick learned from years at boarding school. And then, she was done. She was very good at being done. Julian didn't approach her. She knew he wouldn't. It was her family's lawyer, Arthur, who reached her by phone 15 minutes after she called. He spoke with the steady calm of a crisis negotiator. He listened without saying a word as she laid out the facts. He offered no platitudes, only a single crucial question. "Isabella, tell me precisely what you want me to do." She knew exactly what she wanted. She watched the city lights sharpen in the twilight. "Yes," she finally replied. "And you concealed it? Could wait for another day?" She saw her faint reflection in the glass. "Arthur, my feelings are not the issue. I see the situation for what it is. I need you to set the plan in motion." He agreed on the other end, a man relieved to be given a direct order. "Is there anything else for tonight?" he began. "No," she said. "Begin tomorrow." She ended the call and sat in the quiet for another 20 minutes. Her godmother, Eleanor, was coming. A text message confirmed it. Isabella waited, bathed in the soft glow of the city below. David saw him leave. Isabella didn't know this until much later, but as she sat there, David, 32, on the worst night of his professional life, started to have doubts. He saw Julian's frantic exit. He saw the pregnant wife he had just met, the woman Julian's partner had spoken to with a look of pure panic. He found his partner, who was visibly shattered, and he told David just enough. Not everything, but the vital pieces. And David spent the rest of the evening feeling like his own future had a dark, looming plot twist. I'm not certain how I feel about that. A small, ugly part of me wishes she hadn't found out, so I could be spared this mess. That part almost feels sorry for her. Almost. I am not quite there, but I am close. Then Eleanor arrived. Isabella's godmother strode into the apartment around 8:45. This was 30 minutes late, meaning she'd either had a preemptive glass of wine or rethought her earrings, or both. Both was likely. Eleanor, at 68, could command a space by her presence alone. She walked directly to the sofa. She sat. She studied her goddaughter's face. "Are you all right?" "No," Isabella confessed. It was the first time she'd said the word out loud. Eleanor covered Isabella's hand with her own. She didn't offer platitudes, simple fixes, or her unfiltered opinion on Julian's character flaws. She was simply there. She held her goddaughter's hand. She let the silence do its job. Sometimes that is the only comfort available. Sometimes it is the only thing that is real. They sat that way for a long time. The city hummed on outside. Someone honked a horn far below. Sirens wailed in the distance. The clock on the mantel ticked softly. The city started to sparkle as the sky deepened to indigo. At 10 o'clock, Isabella said, "I think I'm ready for bed." "Of course, darling," Eleanor replied. "I just need to go home, try to sleep, and deal with this tomorrow." "Yes," Eleanor said softly. "That sounds like a very good plan." Isabella had her own car service bring her home. She had already canceled the town car Julian had ordered. She needed those 15 minutes of quiet. She needed the singular peace of being driven through the night, watching the world become a stream of light. She got home just before 10:30. The master bedroom was a non-starter. She tried. She stood in the doorway, saw Julian's things on the valet stand, and backed away. She went into the nursery. This was the one room that held all her hopes. The walls were a soft gray that had taken 5 samples to get right. The crib was assembled. A little bookcase held the first books she'd chosen. The glider was angled in the corner where the morning light would fall. She sank into that chair. She rested her hands on her belly. 4 in the morning. This isn't how it was supposed to be. I had a vision for this. Not a fantasy, I am not that foolish. But a vision of something tangible, something we were creating. The 3 of us here, becoming a family. That vision is now gone. I sit in the unlit nursery, wondering about the future. For so long, I made my life smaller. Not from weakness, but from a hope he would love the woman I was, not the name I carried. The irony is, by hiding so much, I gave him a ghost to love, a fraction of my whole being. He chose a woman who seemed to need him. I never did. I only wanted him. The distinction is everything. He wouldn't have stayed if he'd known. I don't regret that choice, but I regret other things, just not you. The baby rolled inside me, a soft, slow turn, so different from the usual sharp kicks, gentler. In the 3 a.m. silence, it felt like an answer. I craved a partner in this, a whisper of, "I'm here. We've got this." I stayed until dawn grazed the window, then went downstairs, brewed a dark roast, and drank it straight. A text from Mark came on Saturday from a suite at the Fairmont. "Isabel, we need to talk. Please." I read it, set my phone down, then picked it back up. My reply was brief. "Speak to Mr. Alcott." I placed the phone in a desk drawer and turned to my acquisition files for the library. There were 19 of them. I squared each one up perfectly. It took 35 minutes. I counted each one, the way my grandfather used to count his laps. It wasn't a prayer, just a way to find my footing, to find order in a small, controllable task. At 11 a.m. on Monday, Jonathan Alcott called Mark's lawyer, a slick corporate guy named Ben Carter, talented but utterly out of his league, and laid out the terms as if they were foregone conclusions. Isabel was dissolving the marriage, the prenuptial agreement was non-negotiable, and the shared assets were far less than Mark imagined, as most were underwritten by grants from a private family foundation. Furthermore, if the proceedings became difficult, certain documents about the Fairhaven Trust seed money for Mark's biotech firm would be sent to the press. Ben Carter called back within the hour. Elias's call came just as Isabel knew it would. "Mark had a few questions for me," he said, "mainly about the Fairhaven family's financial positions." "And your response?" she asked. I told him that those were private family matters and suggested he review the agreements he signed prior to the wedding. Isabel waited. And how did he take that? His attorney stated, quote, "Mr. Vance will require a moment to process this new information." "He can have all the moments he needs," Isabel said, ending the call. She looked out her study window at the gray Boston skyline. The autumn sun over the Charles River seemed weak, a world away from the heat of August. Summer was gone. At 2:30, her phone vibrated, showing a blocked number. She almost let it go to voicemail. It was an old silly reflex from a past life, ignoring calls from numbers I didn't know. But I answered, "Isabel." The voice was thin, frayed, hanging on by a thread. "It's Jenna. I got your number through. Well, it doesn't matter. I'm so sorry. I can hang up." Isabel paused, listening to the woman's shaky breath. "Don't hang up," she said, her voice even. A long silence followed. "I just had to say I am so sorry," Jenna whispered. "That's all. I know it changes nothing, but you needed to hear it from me." "Go on," Isabel said. Jenna's voice was brittle. "He told me it was over, that you were just finalizing the paperwork. That was the story from the beginning." Her voice caught. "And I bought it." Isabel listened. "I know how foolish that makes me sound," Jenna went on, "but it's the truth. I never would have, if I had any idea, if I knew you were pregnant." Her voice finally cracked into sobs. "I am just so sorry." And the worst part was, I believed her. Rage would have been easier, but I know a true confession when I hear one. This confession is real. She isn't looking for absolution. She's calling because the brilliant visionary she fell for is the same man who lied to both of us. His betrayal doesn't make us allies, but it does connect us. "Jenna," Isabel said, measuring her words, "did Mark ever get into specifics about his company's financing with you?" A short pause. "He mentioned his investors, the new research wing. He said your family had money, that it helped with the down payment on the brownstone." Isabel filed that away. "Did he ever bring up the Fairhaven Foundation?" "No," Jenna said. "He kept that part of his life separate." "What part?" "It's not important," Isabel said. "It doesn't matter now, Jenna. Thank you for calling. I appreciate it." "Is there anything I can do?" Jenna asked. "Actually," Isabel said, "an idea forming. There just might be." She hung up and immediately dialed her brother, William. She sat in the family library, surrounded by leather-bound first editions. The afternoon light hit their gold-leafed spines. Her father built this collection. He would sit here for hours with one book, the only time she ever saw him truly at peace. She told William everything. William was silent for so long that Isabel checked to see if the call had dropped. "You're not going to let him burn you like this, are you?" he finally said. "No," Isabel replied. "I'm done letting someone else write my story." "Good. So what's the move?" "I'm going to make sure Mark sees a detailed accounting of everything he threw away," she said. "And the rest of Boston's biotech scene is going to see it right along with him." She spoke the words into the quiet of the library. "You have to say it aloud to make it real. I shrank my world to make his look bigger. I'm done being small." At 3 p.m. on Tuesday, Mark came to the house. He had called first. He had that shred of decency left. He wanted a private conversation. She agreed, because she wanted a witness to his downfall. He looked tired. A few days at a hotel, the confrontation with Jenna, and a call from Elias had clearly rattled him. He looked like an architect who just discovered a fatal flaw in his own masterpiece. He sat at one end of the dining table. She sat at the other. "Just tell me what it'll take," he said. The tone was new, a desperation she'd never heard. It told her he'd already done the math and was terrified of the sum. "Before we discuss terms," she said, "there's something you need to understand." "What?" She took a breath. "When we started dating," she began, "I needed to know someone could want me for me, without the family name attached. It was important. My father made sure I would never need to think about money." "That was never it. I spent years hoping someone would love me before they knew who I was." Mark was perfectly still. "You had that," she said quietly, "for a time." "Isabel, I'm talking," she said, her voice cutting through the air. He fell silent. "You had that, and then you stopped seeing the person in front of you. I became another beautiful object in your collection, and while I was fading into the wallpaper in my own home, you found a young scientist who thought you were a god. I get the appeal, I truly do. But what you did, that business trip to Geneva, while I was 7 months pregnant, that wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. A decision you kept making for a year. He had nothing to say. The man who always called her overly emotional was now mute. I know, he finally said. Do you know who owns that boutique hotel you stayed at? She asked. He looked confused. The one on Commonwealth Avenue. No, he said. She told him. She watched his face contort as the truth settled in. This was the moment she had been waiting for, not for cruelty's sake, but for him to understand the complete picture, the full truth of the life he had used as a backdrop. His expression shifted through a series of emotions she couldn't name. She saw the final piece click into place. The woman he'd treated as a side project was the primary backer of his entire life's ambition. How much? He started to ask. It's irrelevant, she cut in. That's the entire point. The number doesn't matter. What matters is that I am a whole person, from a family with a legacy that is deep and complex. And I have been hiding in my own life, afraid of being seen as just the biotech mogul's wife. And I am so much more than that. I always was. In the end, he asked if they could fix it. She gave the question the 3 seconds of consideration it deserved. No, she said. I really don't think we can. She was surprised by the absence of grief in her own voice, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. October arrived. Isabel worked with the focus of a woman who had moved from mourning to reconstruction. The demolition was over. The unraveling happened in 100 quiet, cutting moments. This was the time for rebuilding. She began to map out her future with the focus she brought to her craft, with care, precision, and a clear vision. Thanks to their strong prenuptial agreement, the divorce moved swiftly. Marcus's legal team sent over a few revisions. David, her lawyer, dismissed them with unshakable politeness. In the end, Marcus's part of the marriage amounted to his vehicle, his wardrobe, a couple of personal accounts, and a figure, Clara's advisors, called Generous. He signed everything without protest. She guessed, and her sister Sophie later confirmed, that Marcus had talked to the other woman, and she, upon hearing the name Dubois Culinary Group, had looked it up. She showed him the press, the financials, the restaurant profiles, the whole picture. Clara considered this, then dismissed it. This isn't a victory. I need to be clear on that. A win would have been a partnership built on trust. This is escaping whole. This is survival. And I know, not every woman in my shoes gets that chance. Some are left shattered. They lack the support, the family resources, the San Francisco townhouse. I think of them constantly. I'm not better than them. I just had a safety net. That isn't strength. It's privilege and luck. I try to hold on to that. Marcus's things were gone by Friday. He arrived with a moving crew. She didn't watch. She made coffee and sat in her study with a design book, hearing the sounds of furniture moving, the echo of steps, and the front door opening and closing until it was all quiet. Later that night, she cleared out the master closet. It was 2 a.m, 34 weeks pregnant, and she worked by the glow of a single lamp. The space where his suits had been was a void. She stared at the empty hangers, then began her work, methodically sliding her own clothes into his old space. She relocated every dress, every shoebox, every single item. She continued until his half and hers became one, until the closet was a unified space, entirely hers. She stepped back to look. For 3 years, she had confined her life to half a space she owned. She reclaimed it all, like a plant finally reaching for the sun, breaking free of its container. On Thursday, Marcus's mother called. Eleanor was 65. For 30 years, she was a woman who saw her son's flaws and loved him regardless. That was admirable. She sometimes used that love as a shield for him. That was less so. Clara had anticipated this conversation. She was prepared. Clara? Eleanor began, her voice unsteady, as if a planned speech had dissolved. I needed to tell you. I know what he did. Eleanor said, I am not calling to make excuses for him. There are no excuses for this. I'm calling. She paused, trying to find the right words. because that baby is already a part of my heart. That little boy is my grandson. I am pleading with you, Clara. Please let me be his grandmother." Clara was silent for a beat. "Eleanor," she said, "I would never deny him your love." A sharp intake of breath on the other end. "You wouldn't?" Eleanor asked, her voice thick with surprise. "This child will need everyone who cares for him," Clara stated simply. "I am not punishing you for what your son has done." Eleanor's voice changed when she spoke again. The guarded tone was gone, replaced by a profound sorrow. "He was never good enough for you, you know," she said softly. "I know," Clara replied, "but he is part of what brought me my son. And for that reason, I can't despise the entire experience." Sophie did something Clara never saw coming. In early October, she sent a notarized statement to Clara's lawyer. In it, she detailed the entire timeline of her affair with Marcus. She listed his specific deceptions: that their marriage was a business arrangement, that a divorce was imminent, that he was effectively unattached. It was completely unsolicited. The prenup made it legally irrelevant. But it was the truth, and having it documented mattered. "Why is she like that?" her sister asked over tea. "I think she can't stand a narrative she didn't get to control," Clara answered. "Even a ruined one. She has to be the editor of every story. Do you hate her for it?" Clara considered it. "I feel like we were both competing in the wrong game," she said. "Like we were both given a recipe guaranteed to fail. I deserved a better partner. Not for my family's name or the restaurants. For myself. I deserved a man who loved the act of creation. The artist and the chef, not just the awards and the money that followed. I will teach my son to build his own kitchen, so no one can make him feel like a guest at their own table." Late September, 38 weeks pregnant, Dr. Miller moved the cool ultrasound wand across Clara's stomach. She looked at the screen and smiled, saying, "It looks like this little one is plating himself for his debut any day now." Clara drove home alone from the checkup. She had her people, Eleanor, Sophie, even David. But she needed this drive, these 20 minutes by herself with the San Francisco Bay. She paused at a red light on the Embarcadero and finally named the feeling that had been shadowing her for weeks. It wasn't just fear or fatigue or another tremor of heartbreak. It was pure, simple relief. Not exactly happiness, not yet, but the kind of relief you feel after a kitchen fire is put out, and you find yourself standing, covered in soot but safe, on the other side. The building was still standing. She was going to be fine. The light turned green. She kept driving. Oliver James Dubois was born on October 2nd at 3:27 in the morning, following what Sophie later described as a truly theatrical and impressively long 18-hour culinary objection. The room smelled of antiseptic, indignant, and expensive roses. Eleanor had brought a cashmere throw from a small shop tied with a simple ribbon. Outside, the sky was that flat, deep black just before dawn. Eleanor had been in the waiting room since midnight. David sent a case of rare wine, because he had impeccable taste, and knew Clara would enjoy it eventually. The note was simple. "Welcome to this world, little man. Your mother is a force of nature." Marcus was not present. This was Clara's choice, delivered calmly and firmly. When her labor began, she had texted him, "I am at the hospital. The baby is coming. I will send you pictures." He replied immediately, "Clara, please, let me come." She wrote back, "Not for this service. You will know him. He will have a father, but his birth is mine." He didn't argue. At 3:28, Dr. Miller laid Oliver on Clara's chest. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, with a shock of dark hair and alert, peaceful eyes that seemed to be taking in the whole room. "Well, hello there," Clara whispered. Oliver simply gazed back at her. "I expected 1,000 different feelings right now. I thought it would be this complicated storm. But love is just an idea until it has a face, and the reality is so much bigger than the thought." I braced for anxiety. I prepared for grief over the life I had so carefully planned. Marcus by my side, the three of us, a perfect family portrait. I never saw this coming. I never expected to feel this complete. as if my whole life had been a long, detailed preparation for this one moment. Not the marriage, not the accolades, not the career, or the townhouse with a view of the park. None of that was the main course. Only this. Him, this small person right here. This was the destination all along. She held her son as the room moved around them. Nurses came and went. Dr. Miller wrote notes and offered Clara a small, understanding smile. The kind you get from someone who's witnessed this thousands of times but knows that for the one on the table, this is the only time that matters. Finally, Eleanor came in. Eleanor Dubois, a woman who could stare down any food critic or hostile investor without blinking, stood at the door, saw her daughter holding her grandson, and began to weep. These were not quiet tears, but huge cathartic sobs that had clearly been held back for months, waiting for this exact moment to be released. "He has your father's hands," Eleanor said, her voice choked with emotion. "I know," Clara whispered. "He would have been so ridiculously proud." "I know," Clara said again. They sat with that shared thought, feeling its immense weight and its beautiful lightness at once. A week after Oliver was born, Clara was back home. She stood at her kitchen island as the morning light poured through the window above the sink. The same light, same window, same kitchen where just 2 months before she had found the silk scarf in his luggage, discovering the lie that had shattered her world. She was buttering toast with one hand. Oliver was in a carrier strapped to her chest, a little small for it, but snug. Dr. Miller had told her it was fine, knowing Clara wasn't really asking for permission. Oliver was sound asleep, his little mouth partly open. His tiny hands were clenched by his ears. Isabella remembered that day, the laundry, the strange floral perfume on his coat, the bright smear of lipstick, the lies. She looked down at Theodore. "We will be okay," she murmured. "More than okay. We will be everything we need to be." Theodore slept on. The coffee maker beeped that it was ready. The sun filled the room. Isabella glanced at her phone. A text from Eleanor asking how she was. A voicemail from her father. An email from her wealth manager with the subject, portfolio adjustments. She set the phone down. She poured her coffee. She drank it while it was still perfectly hot. She realized with a sudden jolt that it was the first time in what felt like ages that she had done that. Just sipped a cup of coffee while it was still the proper temperature. It was a small, meaningless thing, but it felt like a triumph. A month after Theodore was born, the feature in Crane's Chicago Business came out. It wasn't about her, not really. She hated being the center of attention. It was about a new incubator for female-led startups her family's organization had funded. The Miller Foundation had financed the entire project, the first initiative of its new entrepreneurship program. The article was 6 pages. It included a photo of her mother, Isabella, and baby Theodore, who at 4 weeks old seemed utterly unimpressed by the entire affair. The caption identified Isabella as the new director of the Miller Foundation, daughter of the esteemed industrialist Robert Miller, and the architect of its new vision. She read the article at the desk in her study. Theodore was napping in his bassinet. The afternoon sun was golden. She didn't feel victorious. She felt seen. She felt recognized for who she was, not for whose wife she was. This was her, not just a name on a joint bank account. Her? I spent the last 4 years as Julian's wife, and that was a role I embraced, a future I invested in, and a loss I had to grieve. But I was never just that. I was always Robert and Catherine's daughter, Theodore's mother, and a woman who knew her own worth, even when she allowed someone else to determine the price. That's done now. The account is settled. Julian texted her the morning the article went live. She saw his name flash on the screen, took a steadying breath, and opened it. Saw the article. "You look great." I never understood. I mean, I knew about the foundation, but I never grasped the scale of it. Isabella, I am profoundly sorry. I know how empty that sounds. I know words don't change anything, but I am. She read it over twice. Then she began to type. "Just take care of yourself, Julian, and be a good father to him. He deserves a dad he can count on. She pressed send. She put her phone away. She picked up her son. A new chapter was beginning. It was October. Theodore was now 6 weeks old and had very firm opinions on just about everything. Eliza was astonished by his decisiveness. Arthur, at only 6 weeks old, had clear preferences for the warmth of his bottle, the texture of his blanket, and the specific, off-key melody Eliza hummed during 3 in the morning feedings. He was already his own person, a revelation more stunning than any architectural award. She had designed homes that won international acclaim and secured funding from titans of industry. She had managed complex projects, humbled by the process of bringing a vision to life, but nothing had prepared her for watching her infant son choose his favorite swaddle. They were in her Chicago high-rise for a family lunch. Not their old cozy brownstone, but this stark, glass-walled penthouse Julian had insisted on, a space that now felt sterile and impersonal. She'd decided last month to make it her own, not by redecorating, but by filling its cold spaces with her own life. Her mother, Catherine, visiting for a few days, had already reorganized the spice rack in a way that was both an improvement and a judgment. Her sister Hannah and her husband were there, their children immediately challenging the structural integrity of the minimalist sofa. Hannah offered a knowing, tired smile. Catherine seemed quietly delighted by the chaos. Julian's mother, Beatrice, visited for a single course and left before the cake was served, which was typical. She nibbled a bit of everything, held Arthur for precisely 5 minutes, and then quizzed Eliza on her little freelance design projects, which was also typical. A former professor, her mentor, had sent his apologies with a collection of rare, first edition architectural digests. This was Eliza's new reality, a blueprint she had to follow. She'd considered every alternative, but the conclusion was immovable. She saw her mother in the armchair, rocking baby Arthur and singing a tune from her own childhood. She had to accept that Julian's actions were his own. Her mother's love for this child was a solid, load-bearing wall, a devotion that belonged to Arthur, untouched by Eliza's own heartbreak. Eliza designed buildings. She knew how to find the proper perspective. Her sister sat near her, cradling a mug. "You know," she said softly, "you are navigating this with remarkable strength." "I have my moments," Eliza confessed. "In the pantry and the shower and the nursery at 4 in the morning. It's a family trait. We build very strong walls." Hannah gave a small smile. Then she posed the question she'd been holding back. "Are you genuinely okay?" Eliza met her sister's eyes. She let the silence stretch. She inspected the question with the same focus she'd used to find a flaw in a structural plan. "Searching for the slightest weakness, the renovation is ongoing," she replied. "Some days are manageable. Other days, I grieve for the life I thought we were building, the future I designed in my head." "That's allowed," Hannah said. "Yes," Eliza nodded. "I know. I'm making room for that." After the meal, while the baby napped, her mother and Hannah bonded over a second pot of coffee. Eliza carried Arthur into Julian's home office, a room she'd avoided for weeks. It still smelled faintly of his eau de cologne, a fragrance he started wearing before he left, but which now seemed embedded in the dark wood of his desk. She settled into his chair, holding Arthur against her. A thought formed, so quiet it was barely a whisper. The way you might speak to a younger version of yourself who needs to understand. "I found the flaw in the blueprint, Mom. You always said every great design has a hidden compromise, a detail where the architect's original vision was lost. I see it clearly now. I'm moving on from it. The damage is part of the history, but I'm past it now." Arthur made a soft sound, the little sigh he gave just before drifting off, a noise of pure trust and contentment. "I know what I salvaged from the demolition. Not the rage, not the resentment. I won't use those materials. Not the what-ifs. What I salvaged is this. I know now that I deserve to be a landmark, that making myself smaller wasn't being practical. It was fear disguised as logic. My partner, who should have been my foundation, chose to undermine me. That is a profound structural failure, and it's finished. What I know now is that I am the architect of my own legacy, and I will spend my life teaching him that he is the architect of his. Arthur was fast asleep. His weight was a solid, warm anchor on Eliza's chest. The tangible reality of unconditional love. That's the true masterpiece. That's the entire design. The emergency exit was always on the plans. I was just too busy trying to fit into his floor plan to see it. She composed a message to Isabel. She didn't send it for over a week. She refined it until she was sure it wasn't about seeking an apology. Not for her, and not for Isabel. She edited the message to be what it had to be, a simple clarification. To Isabel, he drafted 2 separate sets of plans. You didn't know about my existence, and I didn't know about his deception. I hope your next partner wants to put you on public display. You deserve the truth. So did I. We still do. She sent it. The silence that followed was what she anticipated. By June, Arthur was 4 months old, a real little character. He had a deep belly laugh and a skeptical squint for strangers, a look that seemed both ancient and brand new. It reminded Eliza so much of her own grandfather that her mother teared up the first time she saw it. Eliza threw herself back into her architectural firm, not constantly, but with the fierce focus of someone driven by passion, not a salary. She was drafting a bold proposal for a new museum, aiming for national significance. It was an audacious concept, the kind of creative risk she thrived on. She presented it to the museum's board on a Tuesday afternoon in April. The boardroom offered a panoramic view of the city, buzzing with the quiet energy that funds major institutions. She walked them through the design, her philosophy, and her vision. She spoke with the calm authority of an architect who had led one of the most innovative firms in the country for a decade and understood her own worth. When she finished, the chairman of the board rose and offered his hand. That was extraordinary, he said. Thank you, Eliza said. She felt the sincerity of it. Not as an empty compliment, not with the practiced humility she had worn for years. She meant it with the clean confidence her mentors had instilled in her. Thank you, yes, it is. She got to her car and called Hannah. They approved the museum? Her sister asked. I am utterly floored, Hannah said with a dry tone, simply speechless. Oh, please. I'm going to be unbearable about this win forever. This demands maximum, prolonged unbearableness. Eliza laughed, a real, unrestrained laugh. The kind that isn't polite or measured, the kind that comes from a place of pure joy and has no other purpose. She drove home. Arthur was with her mother, who was conducting what she termed a consistency test on the artisanal baby food Eliza had bought. Her father's top lawyer was likely already at the penthouse before her taxi even hit Lakeshore Drive. Julian always mistook her family's quiet influence for weakness. The glare of Chicago's streetlights blurred against the glass, so different from the harsh afternoon sun of last Tuesday. That was the day the jeweler had called, his voice bright and oblivious. To confirm a custom piece engraved with another woman's name, this darkness didn't feel malicious. It felt honest. It was simply the end of a chapter. The car pulled up to her family's Gold Coast building. She took a breath. This wasn't the shattered pause of last week, not the stunned silence of a wife listening to a stranger describe her husband's infidelity. It was the calm before reclaiming her life. She thought of that woman in the sunlit bedroom just days ago, her hand on her pregnant belly, a phone call cracking the foundation of her world. She thought of what she'd refused to see and the cold reality she now faced. I was the one who gave him his social standing. His new money was nothing without my family's name. I am finished being his convenient asset. I am the dynasty. Everything. The shared accounts, the downtown condo, the broken promises, this baby, and the family he took for granted. I am taking it all back, and I am home. She stepped out of the taxi and walked into the building. The heavy lobby door clicked shut behind her. From his library, she could hear her father's low, furious voice on a call. Her unborn son, Harrison, kicked as if in agreement. Claire placed her clutch on the table. She walked toward the sound of her father's voice, toward her new battle. Harrison would understand that he was born into a fortress, protected by the unshakable loyalty of his mother's bloodline. He would grow up to know that when faced with profound betrayal, his mother didn't just leave. She mobilized an army for them both. Her choice was their legacy. The core of this account was deliberately shaped by our creators to deliver a powerful narrative of strength that resonates deeply. Thank you for joining us.